So, episode 57. So much of this episode, and in retrospect, the preceding episodes, was setting up Subaru's speech to the population of Paristia. Last episode felt like a regrouping, a pause amid all the confusion that has gripped the group and city since the end of the premiere. Now, this episode will be about preparing a counterattack, about acting rather than reacting, and the first order of business is looking after the citizenry being assaulted by the authority of wrath in the sewers. And let me tell you, they totally got me. Not only me, I guess, but the experience of watching how this played out and what I was thinking or expecting during it, it's worth recounting a bit, because I'm kind of impressed. Firstly, I said last time that hopefully Subaru will realize he can put Liliana on the broadcast media. In fact, we started talking about that possibility in stream way back after the premiere, since her singing and Sirius's power show up in that episode and thus invite comparison. The broadcast media also had attention called to itself, so we knew it was going to be important, in the same way we could guess that the explanation of the control towers would eventually matter. So within this episode, after they know that broadcasting something to calm the city is the answer, they go through what seems like an exhaustive list of possibilities that are not Liliana. It seemed crazy that he wouldn't immediately seize on that idea, having just come from witnessing her efficacy. Emilia's message about where Coppola was located allowed them to immediately deduce that it probably wasn't the cultists who opened the Watergate. And so, how can you figure that out so quickly and not jump right to Liliana playing? I mean, she already has performed on the thing, back in the premiere, where she amusingly sings about Wilhelm's love life. So, okay, maybe it's a matter of expediency, and he's hoping someone who is actually on hand will work so they can take care of this and move on to the matter of assaulting all 4 towers at once. But while watching it, I started to feel like they were padding out the episode, that there was a specific place they wanted to end, and there wasn't really enough content to say or do to actually get there. Like the citizens in the shelters, I was losing faith. Why not skip right to the solution so obvious that we guessed it at the beginning of the season? But accompanying that thought, I knew that this was an extra long episode. 29 minutes and 29 seconds instead of the usual 23 minutes and 40 seconds. Almost 6 extra minutes. I don't know the logistics of extending episode length, but since I assume that it preempts some ad spots, it's probably not something you do without good reason. Whatever was happening was not padding. I was confused, and going by our stream chat, I was not alone. Having a more obvious solution, I didn't consider the notion of Subaru being the one to give some kind of heroic speech. And even when it's suggested, maybe I'm still a little skeptical. I'll spend some time trying to warn Subaru about the possible pitfalls of doing this, that he should perhaps just worry about Emilia and not take on all of this responsibility. We're going to come back to all that. When Subaru starts a little memory montage then, I'm still just kind of skeptical of what's happening. It's not even one of those quick flash montages that the series has done repeatedly, but at the end of it, with Al's words on one hand and his memories of struggle on the other, his reaction is, just business as usual then. And the casual, almost bored delivery in answer to Al's plea sells me on the whole idea. Watching it live, I just started laughing, and I said, no notes. No notes. So, now that I'm on board, let's talk about this speech. First of all, it's risky to show in full any kind of performance that is supposed to be impactful in universe. Like if we knew that someone's musical or dancing performance was show-stopping, then that can be enough to serve narrative purpose. It can happen off stage, and we can hear about it, and we accept it. But if you actually show a performance, there is a risk that it doesn't amaze the audience the way it does the characters, and now instead of accepting its impact, we are dubious. Speeches are similar territory. Short, inspiring ones or little monologues, not so much. But if you are going to suggest the well-being of a whole city rides on the success of a speech, and build up the reasons why a certain person should give it, and it's the main character of your series that's 57 episodes deep, well, you better deliver. And just like a song or dance, your mileage may vary, sure. But for my money, this was a roaring success. And the main reason is because the speech itself is so intimately tied up with the character of Subaru. I said last time that Subaru this season might be waking up to the realization that other people look at him differently than he looks at himself, that they want his input, they feel reassured when he is around. But because we've been riding along with him through all the failures they haven't seen, we understand why this is a hard thing for him to accept. The speech, then, is almost a path of Subaru's own evolving sense of self. He's unsure and fumbling at the beginning, doesn't know what to say, and says that instead. It's nervous energy in dialogue form more than any kind of argument or declaration. And not just in the words, but in the delivery, there is this uncertainty, a man who feels he is in over his head. He wants to run away. And in doing so, Subaru is closing the empathetic gap. The people in the shelters also feel this way, nervous and uncertain, overwhelmed. He may not literally be down there with them, but from the way he's expressing himself, he might as well be. A polished speech delivered with confident panache might work in some instances, but I dare say this is not one of them. It is, in fact, a good thing not to volunteer one of our practiced speechmakers for this particular task. Subaru haltingly sharing his stream of consciousness is relatable, and most importantly, it is authentic. People always respond to authenticity, to earnestness. Thus, when he turns the speech upwards, stating that he can't run away, well, that part also feels authentic. If he was uncertain like they were, but remains determined, is in fact looking upwards, facing forwards, then why not them also? Amusingly, when he was suggesting Cruz give the speech, he remembered the inspirational one she provided in the fight with the white whale. What he seems to forget, though, is that he was the subject of that speech, that someone as weak as him was still in the fight, so how could the rest of them do otherwise? The speech he delivers here is basically the same idea. Now, he does other things that are effective for speech making, such as the use of repetition and rhetorical questions, but the real climactic exclamation mark is the end, where he introduces himself as Natsuki Subaru, the guy who defeated the Sin Archbishop of Sloth. This nervous guy, who doesn't think he's good enough to address them, is the very one who delivered the witch's cult an exceedingly rare loss once already. To that point, he's just lifting their spirits and encouraging their defiance, but to sign off with something of substance like that will peg their optimism at its high watermark. Of course, in doing so, he defies both of the things that Al has warned him about. It's not careless on his part, it serves a purpose, but I fear it leads to grief all the same. However, that's the last thing we'll talk about. I'm warning you now, and will do so again then, that I have a speculation you might want to skip. If I'm right, you'll much rather want to see it happen than hear about it from some random YouTuber. Now, throughout, Emilia and 184 have a running conversation, split around Subaru's scenes, just like in the previous episode. And like before, this emphasizes how Emilia and Subaru are on the same page. 184 surprises Emilia after she returns to the room from her spying adventure, seemingly unable to contain her curiosity at why Emilia did not simply escape. Emilia gives us another example of how terrible she is at lying, and at least to this episode's variety was humorous. In their discussion, Emilia is surprised to discover that 184 wanted her to escape, and maybe 184 is also surprised to realize as much. It turns out what she is most afraid of is that things will continue as they are forever. And after pointing out her smiling at the moment of death last time, I certainly believe her. Emilia's idealism is undaunted. Indeed, she even says she's never given up, and so tries to encourage 184 to do the same. But her reaction to this is almost hostile. Hope is something she will not dare. Hoping for a change that never comes is, perhaps, a much worse state than giving up. Optimism is dangerous, something to be warned against. A fall is more deadly from a greater height. In this way, 184 and Al are serving similar roles this episode, and we'll get to Al in a bit. Finally, 184 will share the horrible truth of her and the other wives' past, that Regulus killed everyone who knew their face or names. Indeed, giving them number designations after this is basically erasing them from the world. He is eating their names as surely as gluttony ate Rem's. Even Emilia must lower her head at this news, but that's basically a perfect cue for Subaru's speech to begin. Hearing it start from Emilia's point of view is another nice touch, and again echoes their connection despite their separation. But one character in particular connects them this episode, and so now it's time to talk about Al. I mentioned the mystery around him a bit last time, and this episode manages to give us insight and pile on further things to wonder at the same time. And honestly, this is pretty much how it always is in this series. During our Season 2 coverage, we started referring to this phenomenon as the lore hydra. Cut off one question, and two more grow in its place. Anyway, Subaru's question about how Al is in a fight is at least somewhat answered by the opening scene, where the resheathing of his sword suggests that he is responsible for the dead cultists around him. Of course, we only get to see the aftermath, keeping his real capabilities a mystery still longer. It appears as though picking up the dropped media was just opportunistic on his part, and connecting to Emilia a bit of serendipity. The conversation ends up being an interesting peek behind the curtains of Al's thoughts. Emilia is only thinking about the chance to get some information to Subaru, and racking her brain for whatever else she thinks might be useful. But she and Al have this kind of fractured conversation because Al has a particular idea about her situation and what he assumes is her mindset. And I'm delighted about this, really, because of the previous times I've talked about a potential damsel in distress situation with Emilia being kidnapped by someone who intends to forcibly marry her. I felt confident the series would do something besides just play it straight, and last episode answered that rather decisively, to my mind. Well, now we have Al, and he presumes that it's the standard trope situation. Thus, he assumes that the message she wants to give Subaru is that she's okay, and he assumes that she is worried about her situation and should be crying out for her knight to come rescue her. Even his analogy about a prince on a white horse falls flat, Emilia not understanding the reference. To me, this is a bit of winking at the audience. Our storyteller saying, in essence, see how the thing that might have looked like a trope has turned into something far from it? Why are you still doubting me this far into the story, you ingrates? On an in-universe level, though, we learn that Al expects Emilia to act this way, and seems to be bothered by what he perceives as her not treating the situation as seriously as she should. Like I said, he connects Emilia to Subaru this episode, and when he comes from one to the other to deliver her message, he is still in the same mode. He even uses the same failed analogy as a way to presage his report, and he expresses his concern to Subaru, I think expecting him at least to treat it like the knight rescuing damsel situation that Al believes it should be. And later we'll learn that no, Subaru is not going to drop everything else to ride to her rescue. Now this is all the more amusingly ironic when you consider that Priscilla is his princess and seems like the last person who would play the damsel. Anyway, when Garf suggests that it be Subaru who gives the speech, the others are mostly in agreement, while only Al dissents. And at this point, I want to mention how we went about discussing Al on stream. This episode ends with one of those title screens that the last bit of dialogue plays over, as many episodes have. This time, the last bit of dialogue is delivered by Reinhard, who joins our anti-cultist party at the most crucial moment. His line is spoken over the episode title, The Newest of Heroes and the Most Ancient of Heroes, with part of the second hero kanji colored red. Since Reinhard is speaking and the Australias are red-haired, it may seem to imply that the ancient hero must apply to him, since Subaru is probably the newest hero. Now, Reinhard himself is an ancient, he's probably around the same age as Julius, but perhaps this is a reference to the Master Swordsman line. I know this hasn't been confirmed anywhere, but I expect that the Master Swordsman power is one of these covenant things, and I won't be surprised to learn that they are descended from the hero who helped seal Satila, with the help of the sage and the dragon, the story that Betty told us. So maybe that could explain the ancient hero. But what if instead the ancient hero is actually Al? Priscilla is red-themed, and Al wears a red plume in his helmet. He's so mysterious that it's actually conspicuous, and he knew things like Tifan's name, and that one shouldn't introduce themselves to gluttony. Even down an arm, he seems to have made short work of the cultists, but he also avoids fighting where the others can see, and wants to be known by an alias. Even in their discussion, he seems reluctant to share what he's thinking, and though he reacts to the conclusion that someone besides the cultists might have opened the Watergate, he doesn't own up to it. He'll even cluck his tongue in something like exasperation before sharing his opinion that the cultists don't care about their plans, that they have never lost and never think about losing. He seems to want to keep his head down, and what he says about the witch's cult, to me, sounds like the voice of experience. And so that, I think, may be what motivates Al this episode when he warns Subaru against assuming the role of a central rallying figure. That maybe Al himself was in such a role in the past, and it somehow went terribly wrong. He lost big to the cult, had his hopes betrayed, and now lives on in perpetual regret. The things he says to Subaru remind me of a lot of the advice that older generations give to the next, that is, the things they wish they could say to their younger selves. Like I said, he and 184 seem to have this in common. Terrible things happen to them, and now they think of hope as something dangerous, something to be avoided. Maybe he lost his damsel in distress. Maybe he follows Priscilla precisely because she seems so unlikely to ever need rescuing. Now, I will warn you again. I'm going to share speculation about the next episode. Unfortunately, I worked this out live on stream and couldn't put it back in the bag, but if I have guessed right, then I think you would be better served to experience it in the actual episode. I do enjoy speculating, because you have to collect a lot of information about the story to that point, and synergize it if you hope to make any kind of educated guess. But sometimes you can sort of accidentally spoil yourself and rob a moment of its surprise. So, if you weren't in that stream, and maybe just want to come back to this part after the next episode, this is your chance to bow out. Okay, so, this guess originates from 4 things. The conjecture about Al as the ancient hero of the title, the way Subaru goes against his warnings, thematic patterns in the season to this point, and the simple meta-reasoning of the next episode beginning a 2-month break in the series. For the meta-reasoning, splitting a season like this it's just really weird. And so I presume they have a particularly nasty cliffhanger to service and make a stew, champing at the bit to tune back in when we resume in February. Additionally, this episode seemed really hopeful and upward-facing, like a turning point in the story, but we're not even halfway. It certainly has to get worse first. And then there is Al's situation. By coincidence, we were discussing gluttony in Discord, but before the actual stream, and the nature of the erasing powers we've seen. We saw Cruz's memories get eaten, so she is walking around normally but has forgotten her past. Rem had her name and memories eaten, according to Puck, who suggests that people who have both eaten end up like she has, that they have become an empty shell. And so we were wondering, is there a third option? Could you have your name eaten but not your memories? Could you still be walking around like Cruz is, except that everyone else has forgotten you, has new memories to cover over the gaps that your absence would create? Thus, as we talked about Al as possibly some ancient hero, we remembered his warning to Subaru and thought maybe this too was the voice of experience. He does get bothered when Priscilla says his full name, after all. Was he some great hero of renown, a rallying point for others who carried the hope of many on his shoulders? And in that state, did he have his name eaten, collapsing whatever depended on him and his memory, reduced to an unknown, a faceless, nameless warrior? I even find myself wondering if he is the hero of the story, somehow still roaming the world as a knight-errant, determined not to risk the spotlight again. And imagining this, as he warns Subaru about assuming the role of a central hero figure, it occurs that the stakes of Subaru giving out his real name are suddenly much higher. This then ties into the thematic patterns. Like I pointed out last episode, this season has made a point of impressing on Subaru the impact and influence he has had on others. Liliana knows tales of his exploits. Wilhelm tells him his name has spread far and wide. Ricardo says he gives them the strength of 100. Cruz is reassured by his presence. Anastasia makes a point to have him around when they hold council, and basically all the stuff about why he should be the one to give the speech. Wilhelm even specifically talks about how Subaru sees things through by gathering others who cannot do things alone. Incrementally and incidentally, Subaru has ended up as the connecting point between so many powerful people. People who by all rights are rivals for the throne. When he makes the speech to further hold himself out as hope for the whole city, he has become the central tentpole holding all that optimism up. And so it seems to me, the most effective thing the Witch's cult can do would be to eat Subaru's name. How much cooperation collapses if that happens? How much despair is then returned to the people? What in the world will Emilia do if she forgets that Subaru exists? Al's warning about taking too much on yourself would be brutally, painfully borne out. It's even set up a little bit narratively. For unless Otto and Subaru have a quick debriefing, they won't realize that they ran into 2 different versions of gluttony. Roy might be the one in the tower, and they will thus think them all accounted for, only to have Lai roaming around somewhere to run into Subaru where they least suspect. And while I don't know exactly what Lai gets out of eating names or memories, his comments at the beginning of Season 2 seem to suggest that eating from those who'd done great deeds, like downing the whale, are an especially rich bounty. If so, then all the reasons that Subaru should give the speech are the same reasons that his name would be particularly delicious. One thing that really tilts me on this too is the example earlier with 184. Although it's not the same thing exactly, Regulus also kind of erases these girls' names, turns them into strangers to the whole world. That kind of echo is pretty interesting to only share right now, and especially since we have actually seen very little of Gluttony in comparison to the other archbishops, saving him for a particularly effective moment, mayhaps. Anyway, I don't want to start speculating on what that would mean, because we can do that if it actually happens. I do want to say that I don't think Subaru screwed up by giving his name in the speech. Sometimes you can do the right thing and still get a bad result. That is arguably what's going on with Emilia. Letting her join him against Sirius and fighting together is the right choice for them, even if it does lead to her kidnapping. The kidnapping is not a refutation of the choice, but a testing of it. If this happens then, it will be a similar situation.